So, welcome everybody back to the
Yeah.
Black and White podcast with Steve and Kate, and uh, really, it's been a very interesting couple of weeks since we last spoke on the podcast. I hope because you went on a trip, and I hope that was great for you. You definitely hopping on,
Yeah.
one of those coronavirus planes. It's it's just very interesting times. Uh, uh,
It's a
yeah,
whole new,
just
it's a new normal for sure.
yeah, it's very interesting times. You know, to where people are worried to hop on a plane, not because
Yeah.
they're worried about it. They're worried about it landing improperly or crashing, but because somebody might be sick on the plane, and you might get sick. It's just kind of crazy, you know.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, and so yeah, how's
Well, and
everything?
I also traveled from Oregon. Well, good. I actually traveled from Oregon to Arizona, which is it's blown up as a hot spot now. And
Yeah,
they've just shut down all the bars if you're not serving food. And, but the traveling, quite frankly, was really easy. And the Southwest at least really did it great. Everybody wears masks. They take you in 10 at a time, distancing. It was a very quiet airport, and the middle seat was left open, and the flight attendants really only gave you a glass of water and pretzels or something. So it really was very simple, but it worked. It was really easy actually, and it was very quiet, very quiet. So, but I felt very comfortable
okay, okay.
flying, and now you're just still sequestering here in Arizona. So
Yeah, I mean it's yeah. Is it hot out there? Like, is it like Arizona? Is it like Arizona summertime right now, or is it still sort of like
it is.
easing into it? Okay, so you're stuck in the house and you're stuck in the oh, you got air conditioning, right?
Yeah. Yes. And that's what people don't understand about Arizona is that when you live here, you're in air conditioning or where it's cool all the time in your
Yeah,
car, all of that stuff. So you can navigate it. But it's their winter, this is their winter. And so, yeah, but people have been sequestered for 4 months, and so
yeah,
they've been inside for a while for the most part.
yeah, yeah. Man, it's yeah, and so yep.
So I'm excited about our podcast beginning again.
Oh yeah, and I think this is episode 3, and yeah, it's just what are the things that you sort of noticed or have seen uh, over the past couple weeks, either while you're traveling, just being in notice the difference between like Oregon and Arizona. Are there any sort of like consistent things that have been happening uh, over that time and over across the two locations, or has there been things that have sort of stood out to you more than others?
Well, I myself choose not to watch a lot of news. I just feel that it's a very manipulated format, quite honestly, and they're only going to show you the worst case scenarios of everything.
Yeah,
But even on social media, I can feel a lull with some of the all the different people being very aggressive or consistent. I've seen that slowed down a little bit.
yeah,
I've seen some people very much maintain this commitment to white people are the problem, and we're going to stay in this and bring attention to those on our social media formats that they're going to continue to address and to challenge and to bring interesting um, different perspectives to their context and the people in their world. So I see
yeah,
some people slowing down. I see some people staying very committed, and so it's interesting. And I've, I don't know, gosh, I don't remember the guy's name, the young man that was killed by the police, and he was begging them.
Wait, which one?
Did you see that one? What was the name of him?
Yeah, which one are we talking about?
Oh, I know. I got to look it up. And I really literally think I should. I know. It's sad that it's like, which one, right? But it was a young man who was, who I think had some disability. And he
Elijah
was,
McClain. Yeah, Elijah McClain.
Elijah. Yes, thank you. Oh my God. That is the sickest thing. It's the sickest thing. I was just like, oh, how is this possible that it keeps happening like this?
Yeah.
It just doesn't even make sense to me.
And
so that came in my purview that just stopped me again. And I felt you just become more and more aware of how does this even happen like this?
Yeah.
And then I'm aware of how it is. I think I'm more aware of that, how Black people are approached by police and how Black people approach white people, kind of on a broad spectrum. Clearly, it's very different. But when you do apps, it really is. I used to watch The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and they still do it, but literally, they just bring video footage up of like when somebody does something, and you're just like, this is insane. Like, you can't deny this. You say one thing, then you say another thing, and these videos that you see and the audio that you hear of what's happening to such, it's so tragic. It's been so tragic. It's just now in the purview in a different way to white people, let's say, I knew it was happening, but when Elijah, that poor boy.
Yeah, and it's always God. I see that like with every case, it's still sort of like a peer review into sort of like police brutality on Black communities, but there's always like a difference. Like each case has like is like a slight variation of it, where a
nuance.
It's like it's a nuance. It talks about the nuances of it, where like this case is different than Breonna Taylor's case. Breonna Taylor's case is different than Stephon Arbery's case, and Stephon Arbery's case is different than Elijah McClain's case. But they're all still sort of it's all police brutality though, and it's always like a different shade of this, like a different side of the same coin, and
coin.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because one of the things that like I'm starting to see more and more now is the comparisons of how mass murderers are. So like every time they show sort of like civic investigations, or what I call them, like social media investigations, where they will sort of document how when like a white person goes and like shoots up a school or shoots up does like a mass killing, they start to like hone in on like how the person is treated when they're in handcuffs and when they're apprehended, and they've been sort of comparing that to sort of like the Elijah McClain cases and all those that of Black people and brown people, mainly Black people, where they're sort of like juxtaposing these two, and they're showing like like the white guy getting water while he's in handcuffs and he's sitting down, and then they got some like a Black girl just getting thrown around and for just standing in the wrong area. Whereas, that like the white guy literally killed somebody.
That's right.
And
it's the tolerance that is given to the white person, the tolerance that is graphically different. It's
Yeah.
just repulsive.
Yeah. And
Environment. It is still like I don't even understand in my brain how a police officer would approach even like a black person at this point. It's kind of like, okay, wait, at least there's a spotlight on all of this right now.
yeah.
And cops are being arrested, put in jail, and then, booked and being charged for their actions. So how is it that in this environment, these types of things are blatantly still occurring?
Yeah. Like literally all this,
And I
like,
think with Elijah, it's a opening of something that happened before.
yeah. It's like because the Elijah McClain thing happened after George Floyd. Like it happened
See,
after
that's what
George.
I'm saying.
Like it happened after, you know. And it becomes this continued conversation of just, you know, uh, really the core concept of just lack of respect for the existence of black bodies. You know, where you look at where there's an institution that that doesn't see black people as as value, as with the respect that they deserve, compared to other communities. Because
So can I, but can, but can I interject here? Because I told you years ago, I mean, I've been arrested twice,
yeah,
and they were minor things. And one was ridiculous. But I was mistreated, and my rights were like, I literally in jail for. I was disrespected. I didn't matter. It didn't matter that I was. And and again, you've said it before. Like, well, now imagine if you were black, right? So what I question, the aggression and the arrogance that even after George Floyd was murdered for everyone to see, how is it that a police officer, and I don't know that it's just white police officers, but police officers go in and think that they're not going to be held accountable for this in the way that it's in this environment? Where in their brain do they not say, I can't do this. I've got to stop. They hear that poor boy screaming. What in their brain is it? Just this is a black kid and I don't give a shit? Or is it they feel that they don't have anything to fear, and they're going to do what they want to do and be not held accountable for it?
yeah.
I don't understand how one can do that.
I think this is where sort of like those intersections sort of play in, where with your experience, imagine, like with your experience, if you got arrested in something, you as a woman, you're going to have a very different experience, and probably not as bad of an experience as if you were a white man. Uh, in that particular thing. And so then your experience speaks to sort of the intersections of power dynamics between men and women, which we all know with like domestic abuse and all those different things, like you're more likely to have that negative experience as a woman opposed to a white man. And then when we talk about the issue or the dynamic of race, and you compound like you being black onto it, then you're probably going to have a worser experience because you're dealing with the dynamic of being a woman and a dynamic of being black. So then it sort of compounds it, and there's no way to sort of quantify it, but it's understood that like it will be worse because you're dealing with those two intersections. And so I think it's sort of like those new
Right.
like
Right.
those nuances sort of translate to other things as well, where you have the police departments or institutions with law enforcement that like as an institution they're notorious for for having police officers get off or like go by unscathed for specific actions that they do because of just how powerful the police unions are, how protected their jobs are, all those things, and there's so many things coming to light. I was speaking with a journalist that was out during the protests pretty recently, and she got hit in the side of the face with the baton, by a police officer.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
and so she had to get surgery and everything. And so she went to a lawyer and was like, "Hey,
Wow.
like can I sue them for this?" And every lawyer that she spoke to was like, "Well, it's going to be hard to even, prove that case or get a settlement out of it." And it just sort of speaks to sort of the immunities that they have, even though they're doing these things, and so when we look at sort of the dynamics of, if you were to run into a police officer, it's most likely going to be a male, and if you're to run into a police officer, it's most likely going to be a white person. And so when you intersect that, you're most likely to deal with a white male. And so if you're not a white male, you're probably going to be treated like, you're going to most likely have a negative experience because there's that level of empathy that people just don't have. And then when you have
Well,
it's a lot of people. I think those are the conversations that are being had, and that people are really really like talking about when they're talking about sort of like like trying to figure out like what are the next steps to like either change the system or rebuild the system. People are starting to have those conversations of like what are the real like like us like what are the real issues that these events are stemming from. And yeah, I think obviously there isn't like a answer for it, but like there are definitely things that we are all seeing and noticing, you know.
I find it revolting and just and I know that white people who do not have an experience with the police themselves, they may have been pulled over, for a car, something with it, were speeding or something. Um, but I know that there's a populace out there is just like, look, if you just do the right thing, you'll be fine. And I think even then, I've heard some people in the black community say that as well. This is how you go about it. And if you just do those things, if you're not getting in trouble, you'll be fine. If you're not doing something wrong. But what I know, especially with Elijah, and I've seen this firsthand, again, dealing with mental and emotional trauma and pain and escalation, and watching people not know how to de-escalate. And we talked about this the last podcast a bit,
Yeah.
that's such a crucial element to implement. Like if we're starting to really talk about, like we talked about defund the police last week, and I literally heard on the radio about, okay, what, and they were talking about, well, that term, isn't working for some people.
Yeah.
And they were literally having the same conversation you and I were having about, like, how can I was like redesign, and they were like revamp and and I was just like, but the goal of it being taking the full on all the monies and redistribute it.
Yeah.
That's, I think they use redistribute in a way that you're looking at people coming in with police who are trained to de-escalate and recognize mental illness, or people who are hurting mentally, who are and bring that emotion down to where they're not a danger to themselves or others. And that's very, very important. I've done that personally often, many times. And there is a language, sometimes speaking into a mental ill person. But Elijah was screaming and saying, and then not listening on the police force side. I'm like, what is shut off inside of you that you can't hear this kid not being, he doesn't deserve to die. How, I don't even, we could spend so much more time on this. But so I'm gonna actually move, because I don't know that it's just disgusting and tragic. Tragic isn't even a word anymore. It's beyond tragic.
Yeah, and
he's gone. So now there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, and I think it's I think the argument for, if you don't do anything, then you won't have anything to worry about. That is not a reality for. I mean, that wasn't a reality for Breonna Taylor. She literally was at home and when she got killed.
Right.
Like it's so to explain that argument, to explain that argument or justify that argument, for cases like that, what is the alternative? Like it's and for all of us, like there's no like body cam footage. There's nothing for us to sort of like look to say, okay, well, let's cross examine this.
Right.
It was a no knock warrant or a no knock barge in.
Let's evaluate it. Right.
Yeah. And so it's like, if we're talking about, just as a regular person, just sleep or whatever, in any Second Amendment state, where people barge in and then you go get your gun because you think that you're about to get robbed. And there's only so many ways that this is going to happen. You turn the corner with the gun. You see people with guns facing at you. They shoot you, and then you're dead. Or you try to have a standoff where you say, "Oh no," and that may come out one way or another. Or you shoot the cop and then you get charged with manslaughter. And it's like,
and if there's no video of that, it's a he said, she said.
Yeah.
And you are the guilty person. It doesn't matter. You've shot a cop. It doesn't matter that they didn't announce themselves. It doesn't matter that they just came in the middle of the night. When you have a legal right to protect yourself, you're going to be guilty, period, end of story. And if it's a cop you've killed, you're going to get the book thrown at you. But I would also say that the other side of even the Breonna Taylor, so if I were to, like, again, this whole thing is about how, without being careful, walking on eggshells. And never is the intent to be insulting. It's perhaps presenting a perspective, even if it's ignorant, even if it's incorrect, even if it's it sounds as if there's a simple answer to it. How could anyone not understand this? Because Breonna Taylor was in her bed sleeping. How in the world is anything justified that she got killed? And some would say, and I've actually seen some of this, that again, it's this, her boyfriend was a drug dealer, drug whatever, and they have been, they've been following this guy. And so he's doing what he's doing. And again, not saying that this is correct, just a perspective. So she's allowing this guy to do his business at her house, or is doing this at, whether she's, I don't know how you don't know this, but he's doing business there. And the argument could be like, yes, they went in, they wanted to catch this guy off guard. They wanted to capture him. They wanted to go in without warning because they didn't want him to run. They wanted to get him. And she got caught in the crosshairs. And yet the argument for that is, well, if you didn't allow your drug boyfriend in the house, this would never have happened to you, but you did, and you got caught in it. It wasn't, it did, they would say they didn't mean to do that. They didn't know who's in the house. They can't assess the danger level. They don't know, they go in and people aren't just laying quietly, not moving. She probably got up and was totally disoriented, and it was aggressive, and got caught in it. But there's people who look at that and go, well, you let this guy in.
Yeah.
And you're the collateral damage of that.
And I think that
there's an argument there. Legally there's an argument for that.
Yeah.
Like,
and
literally when it goes to court.
Yeah, I think and I think, and I've heard those arguments and stuff like that before, but this is where we talk about sort of the problems with the institution, where when we're looking at these types of stories, and when we're going to place blame off of the victim to the the person that caused the harm, it's the intersection of that is most likely going to be a black person or person of color, somebody that's sort of in the margins that would be believed for, to where they're not looking at, this person, Breonna Taylor, that is that probably doesn't have very, very much of a criminal record. They, that are doing things, maybe dating somebody that, is doing some questionable things. But but to justify that because you're dating somebody, or you have somebody in your life that does some questionable things, that justification, or not justification, but excuse for why you're dead or why you were shot, is it takes it takes a certain type of person to look past the person getting shot, and that's where I would be critical of the person. That's where I would be critical of the person, and sort of.
So, but if you look at it, if we look at it though, in a sense of like, even if this is brought legally, because you can be accused of something, but you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt intention. You have to prove that there was some malicious, intent, knowing intent. And police officers, as they're trained and the job that they do and the danger of going into something like that, they do go in often like a SWAT team, because they don't know what they're going to get when they go into a house, that there's people who they don't know guns, they don't know, when you're doing serious stuff like that, and you'll rob your mother. Listen, I had a brother who did drugs, and he robbed his grandmother back in the day, long ago and far away, because that's what he does. So cops going in not knowing, they're going in to stay safe, and it is a shoot to kill mentality. That's an American. It is shoot to kill. It's not shoot to maim, it's shoot to kill when you go into a dangerous situation, because if you don't, you could, so, but I'm just saying, I
Yeah.
look at, should Breonna Taylor be dead? Absolutely not. Did she get caught in something? Did these police officers go in, and is it a racial argument? I don't know that that's true.
Well,
I
it's
don't know that
you can't say
that's
that
the
I would say
case.
that it's very
I think
hard
she got.
to it's
Is
very
it tragic that she's?
well, I would say that it's very hard to prove. It's very hard for a black person to prove racism, even if they know that racism, like, there's a racial component
Yes.
to the way they're being treated. It's very difficult
Yes.
to, if it's not
And
blatant
I
racism, you
and
know.
right.
And so
And even when it is sometimes, even
even when
when it is, but
it
you're right. But it is hard to prove.
yeah, it's very hard to prove, and so what we look at is correlations. And so when you're looking at these things in court, you have to prove cause. You have to prove cause, and it's very, very difficult to prove cause in general. It's very difficult. But what a lot of people are starting to do now is they're starting to say, they're starting to look at correlations. And correlations means that in a plain vanilla situation, certain things are going to happen. And if you add components to that, you're more likely to have specific things happen as those additional factors compound. And so we're looking at, what predominantly white white institutions and police forces and everything that have sort of that immunity mindset going in, and they have this sort of shoot to kill mindset going in, and you are looking at somebody, or you're tracking somebody that is that is a black male that is involved in drugs, then you're instantly trying to approach this as, some heavy drug dealer that is, pushing crack into communities. And so, which probably is not the case. But that's neither here nor there, because you also have to look at the context in which they're doing things. And so, it could have been Breonna Taylor. It could have been, the person's child that's just walking around and getting a cup of milk, sneaking out of their room and getting a cup of milk. It's that and so that's where it looks like this is an institutional problem to allow something, allow the goal of getting somebody, getting a non-violent offender, and risking people's lives in it. That is the problem. Where, we're not talking about, he'll have his day in court. He continues doing what he does. There's people that have PhDs that are skilled enough to find him, but you can't bring back somebody based off of trying to do a raid to get the one up on them, and you can't risk people's lives to do that. And that's what
and that's at the end. Yeah, at the end of the day, that is it more important to risk that if you don't know who's in the house and the risk factor going into that situation, if you're monitoring this drug dealer, you got to know who he's living with, who's there. When you're going in, you got to know how many people are in the house, and that if you're is it more important to get the guy or keep everybody who's safe in the house and get the guy, which is more important? And in that case, it truly was like, well, it doesn't matter who dies, and I guess it's after the fact that they're dead. There's nothing you can do. Because now they're really dead.
And I think that this becomes an example of what of the anecdotes that people have, where people already feel this way. And people have seen this stuff happen, but now you actually have specific cases to go along with those experiences.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing now that, like, things are coming to light, but now the sort of like the right wing talking points of like, look at the data, look at this, where's the data, where's the data, where's the evidence. And so now we're at a point where there's actual evidence, and people are actually looking at these cases as evidence for their experiences, so that people take them more seriously. So that it forces people to,
Right.
it forces people to think, address sort of the criticism of like, oh, you shouldn't have just been dating a drug dealer. It's like there's a lot of people that date
A
drug
drug
dealers.
dealer.
Like there's a lot of people dealing drugs, and there's a lot of drug dealers. And
Right.
so then it becomes a question of what is more important. Is it important to catch the drug dealer at all costs, or is it to keep people safe? And in this case, it wasn't, it was not, the priority was not to keep people safe. And anybody that sort of speaks to that sort of sentiment of like, oh, well, they shouldn't just been there. It's like that comes from a I would say that that's reflective of the person, and how they feel about, people, or how they feel about black people. And we can't look into people's hearts, but we can look at what they say and what they do as evidence of how they feel. And that's often where my that's often what happens, in my mind when I'm like confronted with that, because they, like that's all the evidence I need if for somebody to say certain things in those tragic events. Especially because especially with all the stuff that's happening now, the last thing you want to say is, oh, you shouldn't have been just dating somebody. Like that's not what we're doing. If we're trying to unite each other, that's not what we're doing, because that's not the problem.
Well, and I'm just saying that's going to be the judicial argument
Yeah.
going into this,
Hmm.
if
Oh yeah.
the arresting with the officers that were involved. And again, all of this, I just think, what if George Floyd was never videotaped? How many people, and how the stories were switched around because there wasn't video concrete evidence to the fact. And look, there's a lot of hurts and injuries in the world that you have to prove something.
Yeah.
But the horrific deaths that just the injustices of it
Yeah.
all is just
Well,
incredible.
I think it would be a Breonna Taylor case.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it would,
Yeah.
like, if
It
there
would be a
wasn't,
Breonna.
it would be a Breonna
right,
Taylor
it
case
would be.
because there wasn't any video evidence.
Yeah.
And we see how difficult it was to have actions taken place on the officers. Just from like how difficult it was just to get, like, the officer for George in the George Floyd case charged. And we're seeing how difficult it is to where, like, that's literally like a trending topic every time something else happens. It's like such and such and such and such.
Right.
And Breonna Taylor's killers are not in custody. And so I think that again, we just have a whole, but we're just, people are aware, and they're using these events as examples now, or as case studies. And so yeah, it's just,
Yeah, it's and they become the statistic. They become the it just snuffed out, and then there's nothing we can do because they're gone. And anything, and I think that's where, for me, the initial person, there's many, but Trayvon Martin did that. That just, God, that
Yeah.
killed me, and still does.
yeah,
It's- all of these do. It's just sickening. And yeah. And then as we're talking about what comes across, our way as we're going through the weeks with this, I literally, and I've been actually trying to search on my phone, and I think I save these things and then I can't find them. That's my
Yep.
age showing right there.
Hey, it happens
but,
to me as well.
But I read this. I listened to two things. I've been listening to the 1619 podcast,
Yeah.
and it's really good and it's really sad, but it's really so well done. Anybody who hasn't listened to that podcast, just go to any podcast, Google it. The New York Times put it together, and the woman who does it is just so you can feel it, and it's
Yeah.
interesting, and it's sad, and it's insightful. It's so insightful. And then just this morning, on a feed that I was on either Instagram or Facebook or something, there was this post. It had to be Instagram, and it was about this woman from the South who is looking at how the South wants to save their, their memories and their history and all, the statues, and that they should be able to do that. And she was talking about how she is the real life person example of what happened in the South, because she's of mixed race, and that she wouldn't even be here, and that the only reason she exists is because her ancestors were not loved, not cared about, not with mutual agreement. She exists because her ancestors were raped, brutalized, and forced upon by white America to black slaves. And so her very existence is the epitome of what happened in the South. You don't need to, you have to look to her to understand her, and that the violence that was perpetrated to her ancestors for her to even be. It was brilliantly written, brilliantly spoken, and horrifically true. That this is white America. When I read these things, and I've taken on educating myself as we've talked, and even going deeper and looking, and I'm realizing that, again, once you're more familiar, it becomes a part of the ethos of your visual perspective just around you. And how do we honor? Aunt Jemima, we were talking about the last time too.
Yeah.
And guess what? I read the family of Aunt Jemima had been going to court to get reparations against the white company. And literally the judge in that case was like, this is frivolous. They dismissed it and saying it was not going to go anywhere and frivolous.
Yeah.
And there was a whole article about that. And they're looking for reparations again now. They're like, okay, we're going to go at this again now, we were talking about
now. And so it often just comes down to sort of like that root idea of just like the black community, black people have not been valued the way that they should be. And it just, it's
not taken seriously.
Yeah. Just not taken seriously and not giving the credit and the respect that they deserve. And we see it sort of just literally across every fabric of everything, from commercialism to, opportunities, treatment with law enforcement, freaking even down to like your own likeness. Literally your own likeness. You can't find opportunities off of you existing, the idea of you. And I think it's sort of it's been taken to a head, to where, the things that have the social unrest goes beyond just police brutality. It goes into every sort of sector of America. And I think it's compounded because of like the coronavirus and people were upset. People don't have the money. We're literally in a recession. I mean, like you couldn't paint a better picture than this. You know, global pandemic, civil unrest that based on specific instances from institutions, and we're in a recession. We've been in a recession since February. Like it's
Right.
and like you can't paint a better picture than this. And so since you I would say as we wrap up, since you have been reading a lot, what would be some of the things that you would suggest people read?
Oh gosh, and I have to get better at this because anybody's listening, they're like, you're not giving me any names, you're not giving me any references, and I did literally thought to myself, okay, where did I find that? And I thought I saved it, and I can't find it, guys. So I'm really sorry. So what I
Yeah.
will do from now on is I will reference it. I will look into the story of Elijah, and then I even was trying to Google as I was listening to you about the girl who is from the South, who says that she is the representation of what the South really is all about.
Yeah.
She is the monument to what really this was all about. And then before we wrap up, I actually thought to myself, how I've heard, and you and I have talked about it too, like white people just shut up and listen kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just shut up and listen, and don't come to us to educate you. Educate yourselves. And so, and that's fair. It's totally fair. And what that's saying is, so any white people out there listening, and I do, I think of old classmates of mine who put stuff up. And look, I can tell you, at least on some of the feeds that I have within my social media, which is really small, quite frankly, people are weary of all of this. They're like, come on, let's just, we're going to be celebrating the 4th of July.
Oh yeah.
And do we want to celebrate America? I mean, how is all of that? But people do. They kind of want to go back to, let's talk about positive things, and we don't know what the hell is going on around here, but let's try to get back to not having to look at it all the time anymore. So I think I was thinking to myself, you and your heritage, and look, white people and black people, there's some people hang out with a lot of black people. Some people hang out with a lot of white people if you're black, and some just don't. So is there any questions that you have as a young black man for a white person? Like, what would you want to say to a white person? What questions would you want to ask? And I only say, like, again, I feel like I can answer some of this based on my own experiences, but also from the peripheral experiences with other people that I've had over the years. Are there questions that you have as a black person that you'd like to address to white people and go, what the hell? Or I don't understand this perspective. Is there anything you ever wonder about?
I I don't know. This is always that's always a very interesting question because I'm often like the black friend that white people come to. And so
Yeah.
even if I had I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I've even had to uh I that I even had to ponder on an idea of like a question that I wanted to ask a white person, because that opportunity to not have a white person to talk to has never been sort of a reality for me. And it wasn't, and like as I'm thinking about it, the reason it hasn't been a reality for me is because I was the black person that my white friends would come to talk about these things. And so then it would just be sort of a conversation that we would have. And so off the top of my head, I do not have like a pressing issue that like I've never had the opportunity to ask. I think it's often it's often, like in a family gathering when you which as we're approaching Fourth of July, in a family gathering where you know that there's that one family member, one or group of family members that you know are going to say some like problematic things. Um, how often is it that you really sort of call them out on it, you know, and you address it sort of in a public way that it ultimately becomes shameful for them, you know? How often is it that that happens? Because I think that, you know, it like when we look at these instances of like, you know, racism and stuff from like, you know, these people that we see, um, you know, at least black people think about it as like, you know, they were at some family gathering, and their family members know that they do this. You know, it's not a surprise for the people that know them. Um, and so it's like how have they gone unchecked up until this point? Is often sort of the question
So,
that I always have, you know.
so I would tell you that it's interesting because I come from, uh, I know years ago when I first in the early 2000s lived in Arizona, from Chicago, where it was very diverse, which then here it was not at all in
Yeah,
Arizona.
yeah,
But I have one sister and her husband who are very Republican, obnoxiously Republican, and Fox News. And look, I don't want to be a basher, but
yeah,
to me, it was always extreme right. And, you know, and it was always, you know, and I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm really an independent thinker. And like, so, you know, with them, there was no point in talking about anything because it just never led anywhere. And so I didn't ever want to do it. They would poke me all the time. So it's very interesting because I would tell you on the Oregon, on the Northwest Pacific coast, my family, my children, my child and daughter-in-law, family that are there, I would absolutely tell you that I've seen that they are going to be, they're okay with creating uncomfortable. They're okay with, you know,
yeah.
challenging. They're going to educate themselves. They're doing all of this, right? And then I would tell you here in Arizona, where I have family, um, I also know that uh, like an in-law of mine is, I would say probably Republican, and I don't know, Trump supporter, but not against Trump. Um,
It's all a supporter.
and yeah, doesn't have,
Yeah,
yeah, probably, and has a vantage point. And he actually told me a story the other night that he and his family went from Pennsylvania, and he's like, for he and his family, his dad got transferred to um, New Orleans, and he said um, he went into a school that was an all-black school, and he had to get tested. He's really smart, and he tested in the like lower grade type of thing, and was put into the not so smart class. And they were just like, I don't understand this. Well, he translated the story was when he went into this classroom, he was verbally and emotionally being kind of assaulted, and he was terrified. And it was all black kids. And then they retested him, and of course he went to the highest class there was. But he remembers being so terrified as the only white kid in the room. And so that has carried through to his opinion about a lot of things in his world. So to be in close proximity with someone who may disagree for their reasons, I would tell you, I don't know that I want to engage in that conversation myself. Even they know my position, and it's kind of like the old school, you don't talk about religion, sex, or someone's uh, race. You don't talk about these things. Back in the day, that's what people would say.
Yeah.
Topics off, if you disagree and you don't talk about these things. But peripherally, I think we all know where we stand. And I don't think we may not agree on everything, but being respectful is something that's important. There's no disagreement. What has happened blatantly isn't wrong. And if I were to really engage in the conversation, I don't think that we wouldn't find some common ground, but it would not be fully to the same degree that I believe something for sure. I don't think so.
Yeah,
You would have a different
and I think
position.
that
And I don't go and check that, and I don't check that. I don't go, dude, you have to change. I don't do that.
Yeah, and I think that
I
is
don't.
that is what we're seeing, sort of like this generation, like my generation and on, are sort of confronting that sort of reality, that, like, you and like my parents' generation have sort of allowed to sort of avoided, because at the end of the day, like, they go out into the world, they move on with their careers, and they're probably somebody's boss. They hold the opportunities, and people like that are the reasons why there are lack of opportunities for particular groups of people, because they have that negative experience that they tie to, sort of the general population, because the experience that you talk
Right.
about, that was my experience growing up when we moved to the suburbs. It was just that I couldn't test out of the neighborhood. It wasn't until I got to being a
Right.
senior and I actually drove that I was able to go change to a different school. And so it's
Right.
the and so it's often contextualizing that experience and saying, okay, just because you got picked by some black kids because you're the only white kid, doesn't mean that you need to doesn't justify you being racist, or you discriminating, or having
Well,
these
and this is the discussion.
yeah.
Do we go in? And I would tell you that if this person I'm speaking about was ever, let's say, in a scenario where someone who was black being hurt, this person would be one of the first people to go in to protect and to challenge the other person. He would go in, protect no matter. And so that's the correct way to do this. It's the discussion about, how did we get here? Do we just dismantle the South as the people have? I don't know that he would agree that you need to go in and take down all the statues. And I think he told me the other day, he was reading something. He's like, they're even trying to take down, he's the one that told me this just yesterday. He's like, or this morning, he's like, they're trying to take down the statue of Abraham Lincoln. Did you hear that?
I don't know.
Because Abraham Lincoln had a slave.
Well,
He just read that to me today.
I think it's and I think this is where sort of the misconstruing of cause and correlation. It's like, if with these conversations, it's not because I did one thing. It's often when you look at the reasoning behind, taking down these statues and all these different things, most of them are the Confederate statues, and most of them are because most of those things came in like the 50s, from like 1930 to like 1970. Like those were generations removed from the Civil War, and they were a response to specific things. And so often when we talk about, like, when they talk about, like, sort of breaking down or throwing down these sort of things that we often grew up with, it's often because there was a specific intent that had some, like, underlying problems for why they even came up in the beginning. And people tend to like overlook that and say like, oh, because he owned one slave that they need to take down his statue or whatever. It's like often that's not necessarily the case. And a perfect example is really the Confederate like a lot of the Confederate memorial statues. I mean, those came up in like they're new things. It's not like they were remnants of the Confederacy. Like these things are like new things, and so I always kind of like get a
Well,
kick out of that.
I don't think, well, I don't know that. It would be interesting for me to see if he would ever want to sit in with us on this. I know he works during the day, and maybe we could do it on an afternoon that he's not working. But it would be interesting for us to maybe sit down with him, because I think that even though you and I are trying to present two different worlds, and look, I'm still learning, but I want to learn. I don't know that a lot of people want to do the interest or the due diligence to shift. They may have shifted, but they don't feel like that they have to full on go re-educate themselves about the
Yeah.
history of Black America and Black people in America. So I find myself thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to find somebody who really holds, I'm willing, but perhaps a white person who doesn't think that. Do I get tired and like, oh, I just want to break from this? I don't want to have to always think about it. If I'm honest, yeah.
Hey, I'm Black and I'm get
I don't
tired
want
too.
to spend all my time thinking about it.
You know.
But I know. So that's what I'm saying. It's like, how do we, like, do I address people and go, this is wrong, we have to shift and change? I do believe that in raising the children, the grandchildren, that every parent of my grandchildren respect honorable right and wrong, but how each family chooses to teach it might be differently. But
Yeah.
the essence of belief is still there. One may certainly be more proactive, but both equally in agreement that mistreatment, and fairness and rightness is imperative. Period.
Yeah. Yeah.
End of story. Without a doubt, that is the way that they look at that on both sides of it.
Yeah.
I believe. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
the politics of it may be different, but the belief isn't. The belief is of the same. That respect and all of that is, and people and treatment and all of that is of the same.
Yeah. I think
So,
it often becomes just
but it
like
would be interesting because
yeah, it often becomes a conversation of like, now that we know the information that we know, what are the right things to carry on to our kids, like in this day and age, saying that the Confederate flag is to honor the South, the history of the South. That's not a thing that you want to pass on to the kids, because that's not a reality. That's not a story that is respectful. It's
right,
and so
right.
it becomes like these types of conversations of like the things that we grew
Right.
up sort of thinking as like American history and like American norms, and sort of confronting those realities of like, oh, these actually were not, and that we were just led to believe that, when in reality it's something else. And so I think that like, if anything,
And I think I think
yeah.
if anything, go
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
ahead. We're over crossing some. That I think that if I could, I'll I'll try to ask some questions. And it's interesting, because what I don't want to do is, I don't want someone, if people can believe what they want to believe,
Yeah.
and yet and it's like, okay, well, if I were to say well, where do you stand on this? What is your perspective on this? I have to be ready to hear that without trying to, my goal isn't to change their mind. My goal is to hear the perspective. And that's actually the goal of this podcast is
Yeah.
like, you know, we're at different places. And so without it being creating somebody to be defensive, but even in the thought of like moving, feeling comfortable somewhere that's different politically than somebody thinks, and how, it's fitting in, and I don't really fit there. And so it's quite interesting. But as far as this white person goes, I know that I don't sit around with family members who may have a different perspective on things than I do, that I ask a lot of questions or challenge them.
Yeah.
If it's blatant disrespectful stupidness, I would, for sure, without apology.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I sense that that's what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and ultimately, like you'll never know until you're in the situation, and that's often the reality. Is just that like I guess the perfect example that like I could think of growing up is I was dating I was dating a white lady, white girl, white chick, white lady, and she was unaware of how uncomfortable her parents were, like her, some of her family members were around black people until she brought me around. And so then you're forced to sort of address that and deal with it in the moment. And then it obviously like sparks interesting conversations.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, like, you'll never know um uh until you're sort of put in the situation. But yeah, that's sort of the reality of it. And
And
it's
do we have to be like, do we have to be militant? Like, listen,
I I think
I need
that
to know where you stand on this,
well
because
I
I have had,
yeah, I don't think so, but I do understand the power of marketing and the power of persuasion. And when we're looking at sort of like the right wing talking points and this sort of that like free thought movement and stuff like that, there's a lot of parallels with what the military does and what they like how they approach things. And so often I think like I don't know if you're I don't know if you have the in these conversations, I don't know if you have the liberty to not be militant in times. um because that's what
well,
that
I don't know that I want to be, but here's where
yeah.
I would jump in to tell you. I don't want to argue. I don't want it to be, see, I find no, um, my goal is to be productive.
Yeah.
So to just piss everybody off isn't for me a style that look, I've done that plenty in my day. It's not a style that I think how I want to approach something. I would rather slowly have conver- trusting one another enough to be able to have conversations. I would tell you with a friend of mine, I told you a couple last week or 2 weeks ago, like my best friend, she, everybody gets tired of these conversations after a while, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, and I think I told you, like, well, that's your white privilege. You get to be tired of this conversation and want to not continue.
Yeah.
And she took that on and we continued, and not like, yay for you, but like, you get to do that.
Yeah.
My style is to do it a little slowly around stuff that I'm doing. And then, and I don't feel like he's trying to be disrespectful to me either. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I think it's a little here of information on both ways, going both ways, to where if it really went head to head, like, fighting isn't the way that I would choose to want to do that.
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
and I don't
but I
think
am
that is
noticing,
the I don't think that is the end goal for anybody. I think the because obviously fighting has sort of a a a end result that doesn't feel good, even if it's like a verbal argument or a physical like altercation. Like that has lasting effects, you know.
hmm
And I think that to your point, the sort of like
right,
the annoyance of sort of like the perceived annoyance by being consistent with it. That's just my girlfriend's like whole family, and like part of my family is part of the military. And for them it's always been the power of the military is consistency. They do the same thing every time until you get it. Some people will yell, some people just have a great regimen and they're just consistent. Like they're consistent until you get it, and you'll continue to have the same conversation until there's no reason to have the conversation anymore. And so when you
right,
when you
right,
bring when you think of when I hear militant, it often just becomes like it's there's an effective way of approaching things, uh, rather than sort of like the
right.
hoorah, like crazy things. Because like often I think that's what the military, that's sort of the stereotype that the military has, that often is doesn't do the military justice. And we know,
Yeah,
people that are in the military, people that have family members in the military, stuff like that. Like everybody's not getting cussed out all the time. Like it's but
right,
that like
right.
if somebody's in the military, they know how to make their bed. They know how to like do
That's
certain
right.
things. And so
And I think that I think that that's what I'm talking about. Is it's instead of just jumping in with,
yeah,
so what do you think? It's like him sharing with me, huh? They took down Abraham Lincoln's, they want to, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And just little comments, made. Um, and it's because I think I feel both sides want to be respectful and
yeah,
yet be able to something. And if I thought that there was an um, ignorant, nasty uh, approval or justification sensibility with anything that's happened, that person would feel, what do you, it's no big deal. What are you kidding me? If I really felt that that was happening, I think I would have a hard time in a personal relationship with that person, as far as even a family member. Like I wouldn't want to have a relationship with them if that was really the disregard and the not caring and not seeing the
yeah,
horror of all of this.
yeah.
If I didn't believe that there was some agreement of the horror of it, I would have a hard time, I have to say.
And I think this is
And
one thing
and
that
I
I've
think
sort of I've thought about sort of in my life and the people that like I know, particularly like older white people that have said some problematic things, since a lot of this stuff has happened. The often it becomes sort of like me. In order for me to not see them do some of the problematic things that they do, really the reference point is who else would uh, give them a reason to not think the way that they do. And often it's like, well, for me, I'm probably the only young black person that they ever interact with. And so if I sort of
right,
avoid the situation and wipe them from my life, then they will just continue being in sort of their peer view altogether. And so it becomes sort of like a civic responsibility at times, where that I've started to think about. And um, and that's one of the reasons why I don't like block people on like Facebook or Twitter or anything, because it's like I'm probably the only interaction that they're probably going to get this week or this day. with the non-white
So
person.
what is some of the problem? So what are some of the problematic things that you've heard from white people that you go, okay, I'm the only black person
Oh, I mean,
who
just
think I'm
regular,
a C
like,
or no, and I'm going to address this. This is a choice I
yeah, I
like.
mean,
I want to hear some of the stupid things they say or perceptions that they have.
oh, yeah. So yesterday I'm working on two murals, and I live stream a lot. And one of the persons, it was like a Black Lives Matter like mural banner that I was doing for one of my friends' businesses, and somebody came on just during the live stream and was like, you know, like Black Lives, F the BLM movement, and they're just a whole bunch of race baiting race baiting, you know, anarchists and stuff like that. And it's like, this is obviously something from like a you've been reading some QAnon groups, or, went to a Trump rally or something, or listened to Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro. And that's just, that's just how it is. Um, and, uh, and yeah, that's just how it is. One of my, I think I sent. I'm not sure if I sent this to you because it happened a while back, but one of the guys that this guy that I like went to school with, um, he posted this like long, like lengthy, sort of like impassionate Facebook post about how, I think he said like one sentence. He said, like, it's unfortunate about, George Floyd, um and uh yeah, it was like, it's unfortunate about George Floyd, and then he went on this like 2 paragraph like spiel about how, of all the reasons why his business should not be attacked or whatever. Uh and then we're just like, okay, so this is the only thing that you posted, uh, with regards to the situation. You gave one sentence about how it's unfortunate that George Floyd died, and then we went on this like 2 paragraph rant about how you want to make sure that your business is protected. And then the icing on the cake was that he used a video from like 1992, from like a documentary in 1992 based on like the race riots, of an older black man complaining or yelling at, people in like his community, for like tearing down their like looting and rioting. And so then I looked at his feed, and I was like, literally the only black person on his Facebook feed for months was that one video of that older black man talking about, this isn't it. And the video said, like, this isn't black power. This is not what black power looks like. And it was just completely tone deaf. Like, it was like he found just any video of just a black person sort of scolding black people for looting and rioting, and he tried to apply this to this situation. Uh, and that's literally the only diversity on his page. And so it's like little things like that where I was like, hey, dude, like, why'd you even post that? Like, I understand you're worried and stuff, but like, don't use this video to plead your case when you're trying to it comes across as solidarity, but you're just worried about your business and your property. That's what you care about. And you made it and the icing on the cake was that you didn't use just like no regular video. You used a video that had a racial component to it, and you've never addressed that in anything that you did. And so it was just disingenuous.
So
And yeah,
and it was a bit out of context,
yeah, so out of
to
context.
made to seem as if it's applicable,
Yeah,
and it's misleading.
yeah, yeah. because it's like,
So it sounds like, at least.
yeah,
So,
it was
well, listen,
just, you know,
I
it was
have,
bad.
I think, so we just, what I'd like to maybe have us do for this next time, I'm gonna for sure in the next podcast bring up the references that I made today with all the names where people can go and check them out.
Oh yeah,
And I will have anything else that that I refer to so that people can check it out, because I have to tell you, they're really insightful. I've watched some films. I've watched different feeds, Instagram things, news things that I think are really poignant and insightful. And I think, yes, the movement is slowing down, the kind of the surge,
the
as I
surge.
feel
Yeah,
it, maybe.
yeah,
But this is where the work is still having to be so importantly being done. You
yeah.
know,
And I think it's evolving.
uh,
I think it's
and yeah,
yeah. I think it's like I wouldn't say it's
and but
evolving. I
I have
think
to
it's
say,
maturing.
I also am noticing. Well, yes, but I'm also, and it's interesting. I thought, do I say this out loud? There is one thing that I've noticed that I do. So you know how people say, "Oh, I don't see color." I don't see color, and I feel like I'm broad thinking and all this stuff, and I'm like, I always see color. I always see color.
Yeah,
If a black person, white, yellow, is walking in a neighborhood that I'm not, wherever I see a person, here's what I do inside of my head that nobody sees, I don't have to tell anybody. If I'm really honest, I assess. I notice this person because they're different from what may be my norm, and then I assess. I assess through clothing. I assess through style, uh, uh, how they speak, and how they conduct themselves within the environment. But I notice, I pay attention, and I notice every person of color wherever I notice that, and then I assess, like, like, oh, do they look this way? Do they look? And it's not, if I had to say it out loud, and I'm recognizing in this myself,
yeah,
I'm not necessarily proud of it. I thought I'm going to be honest about this. I'm like, I do. I assess everything. If the guy has his pants down on his ass, I'm just like, dude, pull your pants up. Why do you have to like look like an idiot to me? But if a white kid was doing that too, I would think the same thing, and I have, quite frankly. Um, but if I see, I don't know, I even notice, like, oh, sweet black kids, you know. I don't know if I said this in the last podcast, but um, if in referring to somebody that I'm seeing in the neighborhood, and somebody asks me a question, typically I would say, yeah, these two black guys. And like, why am I attaching black guys to that?
yeah,
Why don't I just say two guys, blah, blah, blah? So I'm noticing my own inward assessment,
yeah. It's
um,
and like
and questions that I have, or perception of somebody.
yeah, and I think to your point, the like the term or the phrase like I don't see color. Remember, before people were saying I don't see color, like towards the tail end of the Obama administration, the big term that people were using was we have a black president, we're past racism. Like that used to be a very, very like, popular thing that like
I
people would
remember that.
say. And that was literally like that no
Hmm.
one says that now. Like no one says that.
Right.
It's crazy to, it's interesting to see like how that sort of, and
Right.
these are the same people that these are like some of the same people that were saying, it's 2015, 2016, we have a black president, we're past racism. Now it's sort of evolved into like I don't see
Hmm.
color. And so I'm curious to see like what that next sort of deflection is going to be. Once we're like, once
Well,
we're past that.
but I got to tell you, once, if I'm honest with myself, and I go, okay, I do this quietly. So am I a racist? Am I somebody who's racist? Because I assess. I do. In my
Yeah.
opinion, I could be totally wrong. I could be totally right.
Well, no,
I don't
yeah.
know. But I notice,
I think
like,
that
even,
because, like
but even
you're
a guy, but even,
Yeah, I think you as a woman, you look at and you just see you're aware of how many men are around in a given context, and so I don't think that that's
No, no, no. Don't make it. No, don't. No, 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 no. Don't make it nice. It's not just that. It's not just that. I promise you, it's not just that. I notice, I notice black women, black men, black children, and I also know that I overcompensate sometimes, or I'm just really being genuine, and I walk away a bit satisfied with myself that I've been so generous. And I'm like such an asshole that just even saying that out loud, until it became conscious. I'm like, wow, I'm patting myself on the back. That's just revolting. Is it me? Hold on. You have to wrap this up because this.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
So,
I think
but anyways, my point
yeah,
is
I think
that
that is something
uh,
that like we could definitely touch on next week or next time we hop on the podcast because that's news to me. That's something that like I sort of
let's
like have
go
I I think like
from
it,
there.
it pops in my head, but like I don't, like I'm never in a situation where like yeah, that's just a different perspective, like it's just something that like sort of I
Let's.
you know yeah, so I think
Yep.
that can be definitely a topic that we could dive deep into because I don't
So
even
as a
think.
let's do that next week. And as a grandmother, I
Oh
gotta
yeah,
go.
grandma duties.
Sorry. I
Yep.
gotta go. So listen, good guys. I hope I'll have better references next week. Good to talk, and let's pick up on that part of it next week.
Oh
Okay?
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yep. Thank you for your time again, everybody. Thanks for
Okay.
listening
Thank
and
you.
stuff, and we'll guys catch you guys later.